no longer enough. Not in this day and age. It is not enough to help us keep pace with the demands that have been placed on us now. Things are changing too rapidly, too fast. You see, we are knowledge workers. What we do is process information, make decisions. The good news is that science has been making huge strides forward in allowing us to understand how to manipulate and utilize the brain to our advantage. Unfortunately, the business community has not done a great job of embracing those learnings, and we have to. If we want to continue to lead, both as individuals and organizations, then we have to. Let me give you an example. If you were to take 8 judges, as some scientists did, and look at all the cases that they had for paroling people over the course of a year, like 1,100 cases, you would find that there is a very clear, distinct bias. But the bias didn't have anything to do with ethnicity or gender or race or any of the stereotypical factors that you might have assumed. The bias was in the time of day. You see, if you were lucky enough to come before the judge first thing in the morning, then you had a 70% chance of being paroled. If you were unlucky enough to come before the judge late in the day, then your chances of being paroled were about 10%. Big difference. You see, we understand it now as decision fatigue. You see, we've learned now by this study and many others like it that there's a process known as decision fatigue. And what that means is that when your brain reaches its finite capacity to make decisions throughout the day, it's going to do one of 2 things. It is either going to do nothing, shut down, and stop making decisions, or it's going to make the least risky choice available, like not paroling someone back into society. You see, our productivity is decision making. This is only one of the learnings that we have that we should be incorporating into our business environment. So we know that leveraging decision fatigue is useful to us in leveraging our brain power. What else can we do? Well, we can build our willpower. Now that may sound like something that doesn't belong in a conversation in a business environment. That it may sound like something that belongs over in a Weight Watchers conversation or a discussion about quitting smoking. And in fact they do, but it also applies here. But the fact of the matter is, willpower is a better success indicator than absolutely any other indicator we have available to us, including your IQ levels. You see, whether you test adults or whether you test children, you get the same results over and over again. Those individuals that are able to resist temptation are the individuals that have more brain power left over. Study after study has been done using marshmallows and hot chocolate chip cookies. Those adults that did not have to use up their willpower on chocolate chip cookies were able to continue working on problem-solving issues 50% longer than the people who had to resist the temptation to eat chocolate chip cookies. 4-year-olds. If you take a group of 4-year-olds and give them the marshmallow test, what you will find is that the 30% of the children that were able to resist the temptation are going to be the same children later in life that have the best GPAs in high school. Their SAT scores are much higher because willpower is used for self-control, for discipline, for decision-making, and for exhibiting initiative. All the characteristics that you would be looking for if you were to be hiring an individual for a leadership position. The bad news is we have a finite amount of it throughout the day. And once it's used up, it's used up. Willpower works very much like a muscle. So it reserves energy when it's fatigued. It shuts down. The good news there is that willpower works like a muscle, so you can build it. It can be strengthened with exercise. There are things that you can do to build your willpower at any age, including mine. What else can we do to leverage your brain power? Well, You can manipulate both sides of your brain, utilize both sides of your brain, both hemispheres, rather than just one. We've known for a long time now that the left hemisphere and the right hemispheres of our brain operate different functions. The best analogy I've ever heard is to think of your brain like a bird. A bird, in order for it to eat, has to go through a process that is very focused, very finely tuned, very narrow in the attention. Bird goes down and gets into the sand or the gravel or the dirt or whatever, and it gets the seed or it gets the worm or whatever it is, but it's very, very narrowly focused. That would be the left side of your brain. But if a bird stays down here, it's going to be eaten. A bird has to come up and take a look around at its environment. Am I about to be prey? Is everything okay around me? Well, think of that in terms of your business world. This is the work that we typically think of as the work that is work. The processes that we need to do to actually get our work done. But we can't stay down here all the time. You have to also come back up and take a look around. What's going on in the world around me? What's going on in the environment around me? What's in my inbox? What's in the social media? What are the relationships that I have with other people around me? All of these factors are both important. You need to be doing both. If you stay up here in the environment, the exterior environment all the time, then you're not going to eat. But if you stay down here all the time, then you're going to be eaten. You have to do both. You have to be in the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere of the brain throughout the day. What else can you do to leverage your brain power? You can stop kidding yourself about multitasking. I understand that all of us are expected to multitask throughout the day, all the time. But the reality is we're not multitasking. It's a misnomer. We use that term loosely. Now, we're doing something very, very close to that, or we wouldn't continue to use the word. But the difference is important, and understanding the difference can help us to understand how to leverage it. What we're actually doing is something called task switching, sometimes very, very rapidly, but it's task switching. What that looks like, take a look at this picture, for example. When you look at this picture, you either see a young woman or an old woman. Take a look. Young woman, old woman. But the thing is, you can't see both. Now, once you have spotted both images, you might be able to flip back and forth between the two, even very rapidly. But you can't see both simultaneously. It's the same with multitasking. That's what your brain does. If you were to look at an MRI of your brain holding two tasks simultaneously, this is what it would look like. You've got one task over here, you have another task over here, but the biggest amount of brain power that's being utilized is right here. It's in the prefrontal cortex where the biggest amount of work is being in monitoring the two tasks, is being used in monitoring the two tasks back and forth. You see, every time you switch from one task to the other, you lose approximately 20 to 40% of your productivity, and as much as 50% in increased error rates. So knowing that, ideally, you want to be switching, you want to minimize the amount of time that you task switch. You want to switch tasks less frequently. We also know that those individuals who think that they are really good multitaskers are the people who actually test the poorest on multitasking. All the factors that you would all the characteristics that you would assume are the features of multitasking are the areas that they test the poorest on, like filtering out irrelevant information. So we deceive ourselves constantly on multitasking. What else can you do? You can work like an athlete. Think of the peak performers of any sport whatsoever. And it also applies to the best chess players in the world or the best musicians in the world. You see, all of these peak performers, the very, very top in their field, have a few things in common. Is that they tend to work in the morning. They tend to work in 90-minute increments and average out to about 4 hours a day. They utilize what we know as deliberate practice, which is very different than just practicing. just going out and hitting some golf balls or shooting some hoops. You can do that, and you might strengthen your skills, but the peak performers approach practice in a very, very different fashion. What they're doing is practicing to begin with what they don't do well. That's the first thing. They practice on the things that they know they need to improve upon, and they do them over and over and over again. It's the repetitive iterations until it is mastered that make a difference. Peak performers also utilize constant feedback and evaluation. Now, if you're doing something like shooting hoops, that's an evaluation that's easy to get feedback on. You either make it or you miss it. You can do that alone. You can add in another level or another layer of evaluation by having someone work with you, by having someone count for you. You just hit the last 18 shots. You are shooting at about an 87% success rate right now. Beyond that, you could go one more and work with a coach. In fact, every peak performer is working with a coach. Now, the coach might be the person standing there watching you watch the video and commenting and giving you more feedback even then. And we know in this day and age that more and more coaches in the business community are being utilized, and for good reason. What else do they do? The peak performers rely on habits and rituals. Habits are processed in the brain very, very deep in the most primitive parts of our brain. It becomes automatic. We know what that automatic feels like. The more activities you can convert over to an automatic skill or an automatic process, the less brain power you have to utilize for that, and the more you have available for higher levels of cognitive thinking. That's what the peak performers do in whatever field you're talking about. And these are the characteristics that we need to embrace and incorporate back into the business world. What else can you do? You can set the stage for creativity and innovation. As knowledge workers, we understand the high importance of being innovative and creative. But creativity can only happen in one of two ways. To be creative, to be innovative, you have to either learn completely new information, which is getting harder and harder to do as the world goes forward. So it either has to be completely new information, or it has to be new connections. That you put pieces of information together that have never been put together before. In order to prepare your mind for that, you need to expose it to a whole host of new perspectives. That means learning a new language. That means learning sign language, or traveling to new cultures, or learning to play a musical instrument. Every time you do that, your brain power actually grows. That's how we increase our ability to be able to be creative and innovative. But in the end, it comes down to a matter of perception. You can either see the old woman or the young woman. You can see the profile of the man, or you can see a couple in the road with a sleeping dog. You either see a skull or you see monks praying. You either see the profile of an elderly man and woman facing one another, or you see a couple sitting next to one another playing a guitar, or you see a chalice. You either see the profile of a man or of a woman with child. It all comes down to a matter of perspective. And the perspective is determined by this 3-pound mass up here that we are only beginning to understand now. What I do know is that there is not a person in this room that can look me in the eye and tell me that you know what business is going to look like in 5 years. Because the truth is, all that we really know about business and how we do business, how we conduct business, is that it's going to continue to change very rapidly. And if we want to keep pace with that change, both as individuals and organizations, then we need to change the way we keep pace. We need to raise our game.